On a frozen morning in January 1945, a four-star American general committed a felony punishable by death. Not on a battlefield, not under enemy fire, but calmly, deliberately, inside his own headquarters. The man was General George S. Patton, the hero of Bastogne, the symbol of American discipline. And what he destroyed that morning wasn't a German tank. It was justice itself. Inside a top-secret folder lay proof that American soldiers had lined up unarmed prisoners and machine-gunned them in the snow. 60 men executed. No battle, no resistance, just revenge. According to the rules of war, it was murder. According to the law, it demanded hangings. And according to history, it never happened. Because Patton made a choice that would bury the crime for 70 years. To understand why, you must forget the Hollywood version of World War II, the clean uniforms, the noble speeches, the clear line between good and evil. The truth lived in frozen forests, where fear erased morality, where soldiers stopped asking who deserves mercy and started asking who deserves to die. This story is not about Nazis committing atrocities. It is about Americans crossing the same line and being protected for it. What happened after the Malmedy Massacre didn't? It just changed the behavior of soldiers. It shattered the illusion of the good war. And when the evidence reached Patton's desk, the war didn't pause for justice. It burned. It is 9 a.m. On January 4th, 1945. The headquarters of the U.S. Third Army in Luxembourg is housed in a requisitioned chateau, yet the atmosphere is bitterly cold. The radiators are dead, and the only warmth radiates from a large stone fireplace where heavy logs crackle and spit. Standing with his back to the room, warming his frozen hands, is Major General George S. Patton. He is the master of armored warfare, the hero who broke the siege of Bastogne. But the officer entering his office is not bringing commendations. A major from the Inspector General's office steps cautiously onto the floorboards. He is visibly nervous. Under his arm, he clutches a thick manila folder stamped top secret. Inside lies a damning collection of sworn affidavits, ballistic analysis, and a list of names. It is a formal investigation into a mass execution not committed by the Nazis, but by American GIs. The major clears his throat and places the heavy file on the oak desk. He expects a court-martial order. He expects the rule of law. Patton turns slowly. His eyes flick from the file to the fire, then settle on the major. He does not open the dossier. He does not ask for the names of the accused. Instead, he reaches out, seizing the evidence of an American war crime, and strides toward the hearth. The major watches paralyzed as the legendary general prepares to do the unthinkable. He is not going to punish the murderers. He's going to make the murder disappear. The decision he makes in the next 10 seconds will bury a horrific secret for 70 years. To comprehend why a four-star general would willfully obstruct justice, one must stand in the snow of the Ardennes during the winter of 1944. It was the harshest winter Europe had seen in 3 decades. Temperatures plummeted to zero, freezing gun oil and turning human flesh black with frostbite. Yet the physical cold paled in comparison to the psychological terror gripping the American lines. The Battle of the Bulge was more than a military offensive. It was a descent into primal chaos. Paranoia spread like a contagion through the foxholes. Reports circulated of English-speaking German commandos led by Otto Skorzeny, wearing American uniforms and slashing throats behind the lines. Every jeep was halted. Every soldier was interrogated. Trust had evaporated. A young GI wrapping his frozen feet in burlap sacks near Bastogne looked at every stranger with lethal suspicion. The rules of civilized warfare had dissolved. The Geneva Convention seemed like a fairy tale from a forgotten era. Here in the gray, frozen forests of Belgium, the only law was survival. The enemy was not merely the Wehrmacht. It was the SS ideological fanatics who gave no quarter. A simmering, lethal rage boiled beneath the surface of the American troops. They were exhausted, freezing, and looking for an excuse to stop taking prisoners. Soon, they would find one. Back home, the American public clung to a comforting myth. They believed that while the Nazis were barbaric monsters slaughtering the innocent, the American GI was a noble knight in olive drab. The narrative was simple. We fight by the rules. We treat captives with dignity. We are the world's moral compass. This belief was bolstered by chaplains on the front lines and officers carrying pristine manuals on the rules of land warfare. The manual was explicit: prisoners must be protected. Executing a surrendered enemy was murder, punishable by death. But on the front lines, the manual was just paper. The reality was a bloody bayonet and visceral hatred. The illusion of moral superiority was hanging by a thread. Soldiers knew that the difference between a battle and a massacre was often just a matter of witnesses. Command believed they could toggle the violence on and off like a switch, unleashing killer instincts and then demanding restraint when hands were raised. They were wrong. The switch was broken, and the illusion of the clean war was about to be shattered by a single event that would trigger a chain reaction of vengeance. The fuse was lit on December 17, 1944, at a snowy crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium. At exactly 12:30 p.m., a convoy of the American 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion encountered the lead elements of Kampfgruppe Piper, a ruthless SS Panzer unit. Outgunned, the Americans surrendered. They were disarmed and herded into a field. What followed is grim historical record. The SS troopers opened fire with machine guns for 10 minutes. The white snow turned crimson. When the shooting ceased, 84 American prisoners lay dead in the freezing mud. Some were killed instantly. Others were executed at point-blank range as they lay wounded. A few survivors played dead, letting the blood of their comrades freeze onto their uniforms until nightfall, when they sprinted into the woods to reach American lines. Their story traveled down the telegraph wires with the speed of an electric shock. Malmedy. The word became a curse. For the men who survived, the escape was not victory, it was torment. They stumbled through the frozen forest for hours, afraid to cough, afraid to cry out. One survivor later recalled that his hands were so numb he could not tell if he was bleeding or simply wet from melting snow. Every snapped branch sounded like another SS patrol. When they finally reached American lines, their voices shook as badly as their bodies. They were not treated as heroes. They were interrogated, questioned again and again. Because in this paranoid winter, even survivors could be spies. As medics worked to revive frostbitten limbs, the survivors told their story. Officers listened in stunned silence. Chaplains bowed their heads. Word spread from tent to tent, from unit to unit. The massacre hardened something inside the American ranks. It stripped away restraint. Men who had taken prisoners days earlier now tightened their grips on rifles when hands went up. Malmedy was no longer just a place. It was a warning etched into memory. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a permission slip. The unspoken order rippled through the U.S. Third Army. The SS are not soldiers. They are animals. Animals do not deserve the protection of the law. The retaliation was not a heat-of-the-moment skirmish. It was calculated, cold-blooded, and systemic. By the time American units moved toward Chenogne, the idea of mercy had become a liability. Soldiers whispered rumors around small fires. Some swore the SS carried hidden pistols. Others claimed surrender was just a trick to get close enough to kill. Whether the rumors were true no longer mattered. Fear had done its work. Orders were given vaguely. Phrases like "take no chances" and "secure the prisoners" were understood by everyone, even if never written down. In war, ambiguity can be deadlier than commands. When the prisoners were marched into the field, several American soldiers hesitated. Witnesses later described young men staring at the ground, jaws clenched, waiting for someone else to act first. Then the memory of Malmedy rushed back. The bodies in the snow, the machine guns, the screams. Patton collapsed into rage. On January 1st, 1945, the American 11th Armored Division was clearing the village of Chenogne. The fighting was brutal. Haustajos. By afternoon, the village was secured, and a group of German soldiers was captured. Among them were approximately 60 men of the waffen-ss, easily identifiable by their camouflage smocks. They were disarmed and marched into a snowy field behind the village. This was not combat. An American machine gunner set up his tripod in the mud. The ammunition belt was loaded with deliberate care. Witnesses described a scene that mirrored Malmedy in reverse. The order was given. The gun roared. The 60 German prisoners were cut down in waves. Survivors were finished off with rifles. It was a mass execution, carried out by boys from Ohio, Texas, and New York. The Chenogne Massacre was complete. Snow covered the bodies, but it couldn't hide the fact that an American unit had just committed a war crime, rivaling the enemy's worst atrocities. The cycle of vengeance had come full circle. The killing stopped, but the bureaucracy ground on. Local Belgian civilians had seen enough to know something terrible had happened. Some watched from windows. Others found blood-stained snow the next morning where prisoners had stood. A few spoke quietly to American officers, unsure whether truth would protect them or destroy them. Behind the lines, staff officers debated how much detail should go into reports. Language was softened. Numbers became vague. Words like executed were replaced with killed while attempting escape. Paperwork, like bullets, could be aimed. Despite the effort to control the narrative, too many people knew. The truth leaked upward, carried by conscience as much as procedure. You cannot hide 60 bodies forever. Reports reached the rear. On January 2nd, the Inspector General's office launched a formal inquiry. This was a full legal investigation. Investigators moved fast, collecting sworn statements from civilians and U.S. officers who had seen the carnage. The file grew thick with undeniable proof. It named the unit the 11th Armored. It named the officers. It outlined charges that carried a mandatory penalty, death by hanging. The implications were catastrophic. If this went to trial, it would be a propaganda goldmine for Joseph Goebbels. The Americans are the true murderers. The file climbed the chain of command until it landed on the desk of the Third Army commander. On January 4th, the illusion of the moral high ground was trapped inside that manila folder. The stone room in Luxembourg is silent, save for the snapping logs. The major watches General Patton, waiting for the explosion. He expects Patton to scream, to uphold the discipline he is famous for. Patton weighs the file in his hand. He asks, in a dangerously calm voice, "What is the nature of the allegations?" "The killing of prisoners, General," the major replies. 11th Armored. Patton nods slowly. He walks to the fireplace, the orange glow illuminating the deep lines of his face. He looks at the top secret stamp one last time. Then, he delivers a verdict that will never appear in any law book. "There are no snipers in this army," Patton growls, his voice like gravel. "And I woe and have my men prosecuted for killing the sons of bitches who killed our boys." With a flick of his wrist, he tosses the file into the fire. The paper curls, catches flame, turns brown, then black, and finally crumbles into ash. The names, the testimony, the justice, it all vanishes up the chimney in a wisp of gray smoke. Patton stands there, challenging the major to speak. The major stands frozen. A creature of rules, he has just witnessed a felony committed by the highest-ranking officer in the room. The silence is deafening. There is no debate. The general's authority is absolute. To speak is to end his career. To leave is to bury the crime. He salutes stiffly. Patton, watching the last embers of the evidence turn to dust, does not immediately return it. The major turns and exits, closing the heavy door softly. Inside, Patton's aide pours a drink, his hand trembling. He knows what he has witnessed. Outside, the war is for democracy and law. Inside this room, the law has been suspended. They are no longer just soldiers. They are accomplices. Why did he do it? Why did the man who once slapped a soldier for cowardice protect murderers? The answer lies in Patton's psychology of combat. He viewed war not as a legal dispute, but as a tribal struggle for survival. He knew the 11th Armored was heading back into the meat grinder. He needed them lethal. To court-martial, their officers would break the division's spirit, would tell his men the army cared more about dead Germans than living Americans. Furthermore, Patton hated the SS. After Malmedy, he had dehumanized them. To him, they were not soldiers. They were rabid dogs. Erasing the Chenogne Massacre wasn't a crime to him. It was a necessary act of command. He prioritized the morale of the living over justice for the dead. The consequences were immediate. No MPs arrived. The investigation evaporated. The soldiers returned to their tanks, realizing the message: the old man has our back. The inhibition against killing vanished. The 11th Armored fought with savage, reckless efficiency, knowing they were untouchable. But the moral fallout was corrosive. Young liberators had become executioners. The stain of Chenogne settled deep into the unit, a dark bond among men who knew they got away with murder because their general struck the match. History is written by the victors. Malmedy became infamous. Chenogne vanished. There were no trials, no hangings. The 11th Armored went down as heroes. It established a dangerous precedent. War crimes are only prosecuted when you lose. We remember Patton as the knight in shining armor. But the truth is complex. He was a warrior, not a judge. On that cold January morning, he chose his men over the law. We saved them from the hangman, but he couldn't save them from their memories. The fire in his office destroyed the evidence, but it couldn't burn the image of those 60 men dying in the snow from the minds of the shooters. War is not a clean fight between good and evil. It is a descent into madness, where even the best men do the worst things. Patton's fire didn't purify the war, it just hid the cost. And sometimes the hardest truth is that the heroes we worship are also the men who hold the lighter. War stories are often told in black and white, heroes on one side, monsters on the other. But the truth lives in the gray. In the frozen silence of places like Chenogne, morality doesn't die in a dramatic moment. It erodes, quietly, one decision at a time. Patton believed he was protecting his men, and perhaps in a brutal, tribal sense, he was. But protection came at a price. When justice is sacrificed for victory, something darker replaces it. Permission. Permission to kill. Permission to forget. Permission to let history tell only half the story. The fire in Patton's office erased names and documents, but it could not erase memory. Those soldiers carried Chenogne with them for the rest of their lives, a secret bond forged not by heroism, but by silence. World War II did not end because one side was morally pure. It ended because one side was stronger. Strength does not absolve guilt. If this story unsettles you, it should. Because understanding history is not about worshiping heroes, it's about confronting uncomfortable truths. This channel exists to tell the stories that were buried, suppressed, or quietly burned away. Stories that remind us that war does not reveal who is good or evil, it reveals who we become when survival is the only law. If you want to hear the stories history tried to forget, subscribe to World War Stories. Because some truths don't die.